I probably started writing what became Dark City in the early 90s, in fact. I think probably around 91 or something like that is when I first started working on it. Well, Dark City was conceived of as a mystery from the very beginning, and that you would be put into this very subjective experience with the main character. He doesn't know what's going on at the beginning of the story. He has no idea. He wakes up in a nightmare, and he has to unravel the mystery of his own existence and the world that he lives in. All the reading that I was doing and all the thinking about certain, I guess, philosophical views of the world all sort of went into this one thing.
I thought it was unusual in that it was clearly a director's screenplay. It was written by a filmmaker rather than a writer. Usually, as a screenwriter, you get sent rewrite jobs or possibilities, and they're by other writers. This was quite different. I don't think I'd ever been sent a script by an actual filmmaker before. So it was impressive in that it was very visual.
I read some of Lem's scripts, and I thought they had a totally unique voice to them. And after meeting Lem and talking about the script and what I wanted to achieve with it, he seemed really in tune with it. He was also very in tune with the genre of noir and the era.
I don't think I even had to go to Australia. I think he pretty much hired me based on the notes I'd written and our initial phone conversation. We seemed to hit it off and be thinking along the same lines. And so I actually had a contract in hand by the time I got on a plane and went to Australia. So that's pretty amazing to sort of be hired sight unseen. Particularly when I remember in my notes, I said, I sort of indicated certain things in the script I thought were cliches. So that's how you get hired in Hollywood, is by telling your director that his script is full of cliches and has certain pretentious elements that should be removed. I remember the first thing was that the character was called Walker in his original script, and I said, you can't call him Walker. That's it's been done to death, and it's been taken so famously by Lee Marvin in Point Blank. But by this point, you see the name Walker, and it's meant to symbolize a, existential everyman trying to find his place in the world. This was the original 9-page document that I sent Alex, that I faxed him after reading his script, that we then discussed on the telephone. And I said to him, these are rough, random, unstructured thoughts and ideas based on one reading of the script, a script I like very much, so please take any criticisms as coming from a friendly source. I also believe very strongly in the auteur theory, and that a screenwriter coming into a situation like this is primarily a facilitator on board to help the director realize the film in his mind. So if in fact we end up working together, nothing in these pages should be considered set in stone. This is all just stream of consciousness material thrown out for discussion and argument. Alex asked if the script was perhaps attempting too much. I don't think you can ever attempt too much. The only question really is how much the audience actually sees and experiences on the surface, and how much is felt as an undercurrent or explored in the film's subtext.
All I can say is, I was working on Dark City. That was the film that I was convinced I had to make somehow, and really wasn't getting very far with in Hollywood. The script had been sent out to a few people, but I think for me at that stage, people just thought it was just, unfilmable, quite frankly.
I remember going to dinner with Alex and the producer, Andrew Mason. We went to dinner at the head of the studio's house to talk about the film. I don't remember how soon afterwards it was put into turnaround. I just remember being at this dinner at Donald DeLine's house, who's a lovely guy. I worked with him later. Probably for the reason I'm about to tell you, because at some point Donald DeLine looked at Alex Proyas and he said, I don't understand it when you tell it to me. And he turned to Andrew Mason. He said, I don't understand it when you tell it to me. And he turned to me and he said, I only understand it when he tells it to me. I have no idea. But it was this eternal problem of just not being able to figure out the rules. What were I think, in Hollywood, in any screenplay, the suits want to know what the rules are. They want to do the math. And it's terribly irritating to filmmakers because we often don't care about the math. Like I've been saying, I don't care about the story, the plot. I care about the man in search of himself and, other things. And when you have meetings in Hollywood, quite often all people really can talk about is the actual plot. How does he get from A to B? Who are these aliens? Where do they come from? They want everything answered. And as we know, often the best movies don't answer everything. They leave room for interpretations. They leave room for discovery on the part of the viewer. You don't want total confusion, obviously. You don't want the viewer to be lost or to get bored or to be mystified completely, but you don't want everything spelled out. You want it to be ambiguous here and ambivalent there and have mysteries. And like in real life, there are shadows in the corner of the room and you don't know everything about other people and, But so I think in the end, they were just wary. The studio was wary. The initial studio, Disney, was wary of the complexities of this film and the uncertainties. And it just wasn't a clear, and again, again, what makes it, I suppose, postmodern. It's not clearly a science fiction film or an action film or a special effects extravaganza or a mystery film. It is a hybrid.
There was an executive at Fox named Sanford Panich who now works at a company called New Regency. And I was having lunch with Sanford, and Sanford said, "Have you ever heard of Dark City? We're thinking of making it here." "Yeah, I have." "We're looking for somebody who can work with Alex and make it not as weird," was what Sam had been said. And so at that point, there was a sort of early version of the script, and I read it, and I had a conversation with Alex, and little did they know I would help Alex make it even weirder.
And then The Crow came along, and I think one of the reasons I responded to The Crow is because it had some similar visuals and some similar ideas in a way.
Then the president of production at Fox got fired over there, a guy named Tom Jacobson, who was a cool guy. And what usually happens at studios is whenever someone high up is fired, whatever projects they had are just immediately flushed down the toilet because that was the old regime, and now the new regime is in.
And there was always an enormous tension there between me and the studios in terms of me wanting it to be as out there as I possibly could make it, and them wanting it to be either a smaller budget or to dumb it down, So what both Lem and David both did in many ways is to try and dance that merry jig with them to a certain extent and try and find that sort of compromise, if you want to call it that.
Then we found ourselves after a few months at New Line, which turned out to be the best of all possible worlds because New Line has a tendency to be the least creatively interfering of all the studios.
The genesis of Dark City, even once we got involved with the studio, was a really slow and ponderous one, because I wanted this thing to be just completely off the wall. And I think this is where I finally discovered the sort of the principle that functions in Hollywood, which is the bigger the budget of a project, the smaller the ideas. That's a direct correlation.
I always am very pleased when I hear that something I'm doing has got a very low budget, because the chances of making the film that you want are that much improved. I mean, luckily, Alex managed to still make his film.
If you want to do something that has out there ideas in it, you have to absolutely keep the budget down. I wasn't really prepared to do that because I couldn't make this film on a small budget. I mean, as in fact, the budget was ridiculously small for the type of film that it was, but it was still $27 million, which in those days was still a lot of money. Once the machine is rolling and you're in pre-production, you as a director don't have as much time to give to every department as you'd like, because you're always running late to your next meeting with the next department.
Even though Rufus Sewell did an amazing job, there was a possibility that Johnny Depp might do it. What would have been interesting if we made the movie with Johnny Depp is, even if he's an amnesiac, he's still Johnny Depp, or he's still, character X, Y, or Z. And it would have been a different movie. I don't know. Would it have been a better movie? It would have been certainly a different movie, because though he's playing someone who has no memory, you still say, oh, I know that guy. It's Johnny Depp.
We did a week or so of rehearsals, which for a film actually is quite a lot. It was all in Sydney, and we're just all sitting around a table with huge great bowls of grapes in front of us, which is impossible not to eat for some reason. I don't know what it is with grapes and read-throughs. Every line,
I think Alex was even talking to Tom Cruise at one point about playing Murdoch.
Mostly what I remember of the Fox period was that everything shut down for a month or more because the magical name Tom Cruise suddenly occurred. Someone brought up the name, they said, Tom has it. Tom's reading it.
It was a matter of just talking it through and thinking it through and reading it through, not really getting up and acting it out, but just, asking any questions that needed to be asked.
Everybody got on with each other very well. Nobody played Mr. Big Time, or, everybody interacted very, very nicely, very graciously and socially.
Even when I first read for Alex telling me that Richard O'Brien was going to do it, and I could imagine it the way I hoped it would be with him playing it, and that's the way it was.
To some extent, playing one of these alien beings inhabiting the bodies of human beings was difficult, because I wanted to bring some emotion to it, but I knew I kind of wasn't allowed to do that. Very difficult, because actors want to bring the energy. That's the depth to the character and flesh out the character.
Kiefer was on set lassoing people by his trailer. That was his way of passing time. Yeah, he had a little rope, and I learned very quickly that if I wanted to, go and get my lunch quickly and not be tied to a post, I would not go past Kiefer's trailer, because you'd suddenly latch it around your foot and pull.
Outside of Australia, he had this like a fake bullhead. I'm sure there's in the cowboy language, there's a special name for it, a buck or something. Right? And he used to practice with his lasso. And one day he says to me, why don't you make 5 steps? And he grabbed my foot with it on my 3rd step. I was very impressed. And then some Australian guys gave him a whip, because Australian cowboys use a whip. They don't use a lasso. So he practiced with a whip.
There was a certain amount of anticipation and or anxiety before William Hurt was going to show up in Australia, because he's a brilliant actor, but he's also known to be very demanding and kind of a tough customer. And so everyone was very nervous.
I liked him very much. He was like, but I was very taken with, and I tried to, learn something from him, that the pace and the energy was so frenetic on set, and especially with the scenes I was doing, that I was struck with his ability to just not take on the pace of the people around him. To have an internal rhythm that was his own.
First day of shooting, Alex called me up and said, William wants some alternate lines or some additional lines for this scene. Can you come up with 3 additional lines? And I stayed up extra late in my hotel room trying to come up with, is William Hurt, Academy Award winner? What's he? And I remember I wrote 3 alternate lines, and I, the next morning, sent them in to Alex and said, here they are. And Alex called back and said, he likes them all. He's going to do them all. So what was one alternate line became like a whole mini monologue.
I thought he was a great alternate energy to mine, which was a lot of the time,
There may have been some other women, aside from Jennifer Connelly, that were being talked about at one point as well. She definitely was not the studio's first choice at the time.
She was lovely. I remember the time of her being very frustrated, because similarly to me, but I think worse in her case, it's such a hard part to play.
But what's ironic about the situation is Jennifer Connelly is a bigger star now than probably any one of us were contemplating to play that role back during Dark City. And so it's just funny how fortunes, wax and wane and all of that.
A lot of people say that the darker the tone of the film, the lighter it can be on set, I think doing a comedy can possibly be quite a tedious and bitchy business, But Alex Proyas was, for me, great fun. I mean, very, very, centered and dedicated.
There is something rather wondrous about that slight bondage kind of look. I must confess, there's a bit rock and roll, which was quite nice too, you see. There's something about that.
The strangers really were, who are the trench-coated guys in the film, were really inspired by Nosferatu and German Expressionism and all those black fedoras they were wearing and those full-length coats.
Originally, there was Alex had a conceptual drawing from a Russian fellow. I don't know his name, but he had one conceptual drawing of the Strangers, and they were in a mishmash of theatrical style clothing holding the long dagger, which became a bit of a trademark with the Strangers.
The Strangers built the city based on our memory, and so it's some weird retro world that they kind of fabricated, and it's a mixture of stuff, you know. So you do get a very odd mix of 40s, 50s, 60s, and probably even 70s in there.
Originally, everything did take on that flavour because it's such a great era. I mean, 40s is retro is the future. A lot of films, Brazil, Metropolis, sort of like have that feel. So I think we followed that design path. We had to pull back a little bit from it because it was getting too much into a period film where it was going to be cliche. So as we went on, a few more designs were thrown in there to mix it up. So we had some 70s influence and quite a bit of 60s. Hats and things, scarves and typical 40s, telltale signs of 40s would be removed. But the basic overall flavour you would call a 40s feel.
It's totally about, the Eastern European kind of aesthetic or the, early German expressionist stuff. It's everything from Metropolis to Blade Runner to, that's what we were interested in.
Dr. Mabuse, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, even purely for that kind of the city, the Nosferatu.
It was a very groovy movie, you see. I remember saying to Rufus Sewell, I said, actually, truthfully, it really doesn't matter, does it, whether it's a box office success, because we're going to get paid as actors anyway. Sorry, Alex, but this is true. We're going to get paid as actors anyway, and isn't it nice to be part of something which is groovy? And I remember he did agree with me on that particular issue.
Colour palettes are always very important to me in films, and I always try and come up with what the palette is going to be. And I'm a fairly visual guy, and I feel like limiting colours can make something really dramatic. And then, as you say, when something like red blood appears, it really stands out, just purely because you haven't seen a lot of other red in the film.
It was sort of that industrial toxic lighting that they loved. Him and Darius Wolski had actually come up with this combination of nasty lights, and they were the yellow street light, the sodium vapor, and then there was the cooler white lights, which were the metal halide lights, and they lived in the underworld.
We wanted a very specific look for the world of the humans, and then a world for the strangers was a different colour palette.
Well, there was one idea which I thought I'm kind of proud of when I start looking at those stages that Alex built it, and because everything is so stylized, I thought about that if you bring something that is contemporary and kind of naturalistic, it will make the whole thing look much better. So at that time, it's pretty common right now, but at that time it was quite original that we started experimenting with using existing streetlights. Like if you go in the city, and they usually either sodium vapor, which are like very orangey kind of strange warm color, or metal highlighted like greenish blue, or fluorescent lighted green. So that was my approach. And then we divided the whole thing that the city is lit with those sodium vapor lights, which we basically took big catalog of all the industrial lights. And we bought those lights and we rigged them in those very stylized street lights. So the whole that's why the movie has this very kind of weird, eerie, yellowish, slightly monochromatic, kind of strange look. And then Underworld we wanted to distinguish, so we just decided to go with metal highlight lights or cool whites, fluorescent tubes, which produce this bluish green color. Yeah.
You know, there's also this rule that I heard that, you know, it's one of these rules you hear as a filmmaker when you're learning the craft, and I don't know who makes these rules up, but they sort of appear somehow. And this rule that I heard was that you should never dress your actors in a similar colour to the set. And so since I heard that rule, I was, of course, tried to break it as much as possible just to prove that it wasn't true.
Well, Dark City was almost all on a stage, and large portions of the city had already been built. So Alex could decide, well, fine, I'm going to showcase this scene. I'm going to do this scene. And if he decided, well, maybe I want to do that scene, then he had more latitude in terms of what scenes he wanted to film where, because they just built the whole thing, and it was like having your own city.
Basically, the sets were very cleverly built on a sound stages in what is now the Fox Studios in Sydney. These were, at this point, they were large exhibition halls and large centres, and Alex had taken them over and built this entire street set that you could drive through and around, and then he even built, you know, large canals, etc. So he actually flooded it for the canal sequence in the end of the film. It was a very low-tech film, and what we wanted to do was to keep it that way because we wanted shots in camera. Literally, if we could avoid an optical, we would.
Well, I love miniatures, of course, you know, and I sort of embraced that because, I mean, you know, really, the sort of berserk idea of doing all the wide shots of the cars in miniature, I think you'd have to be a true aficionado of miniatures to do that. Otherwise, I think most filmmakers would have just gone, you know what, it's just going to be a simpler car chase, you know.
There were some miniatures where we were actually making bigger scale versions. So, for example, the syringe that's being used by Schreiber, we built something that was literally, you know, this large. So there's this huge needle coming at the lens, and that was built as a macro miniature, if you like, to be able to hold focus and make a really nasty shot of the syringe coming at you.
It was quite easy for me to understand the problem of the character never seeing the sun, because I was in Sydney. Just, you know, occasionally at one of these huge barn doors on the side of the studio would open out and you get a wisp of sunlight, and a bit of sand would come in, and the sea air and seagulls, and then it would close, and that would be your sunlight for the day. And I'd work all through, and I'd come out and it'd be night. I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and this idea of trying to find the way to the beach and have you noticed the sun never shines was very much part of my experience of Sydney.
I wanted to make people feel very unsettled in the interiors. So even if there was a scene of just two people talking in a room, I didn't want a respite for the audience at that stage. So many movies give you that. But I just wanted a constant reminder that we were in this artificial environment.
You know, the way the sets were built were so confined, so small, and so, because we want to see everything, ceilings and walls and the frames. And I just happened to have a bit of experience of working with Tony Scott. I wouldn't dare it before, but after working with Tony, I've learned that in order to put the light in an impossible place and hide it so you could see the whole set, the only answer is to take a chainsaw, cut the wall out. So I have, and I'm not sure if the set dressing, set construction crew Australia was used to that. So looking at the sets and trying to figure out how to light them, I just purchased a chainsaw to one of our set carpenters, and I gave it to him. And from then on, every wall was cut out in 5 minutes and put back together.
We originally shot the film for about 65 days, approximately. Though we got to a point in the schedule where we knew we were just not going to get through the script.
I think shoot was like 85, 86 days. You add another, 6 weeks to the prep. It's close to 6 months.
I want to say that we lost our money at one point, which I think we might have, or our budget, or something like that had happened.
We were told in no uncertain terms that we had to end on day 65, come hell or high water. That was simply all that we would be able to do. I had to point out to the studio that the cut would probably not make a lot of sense because we were actually running over.
The whole architecture of a film is much more tenuous than people realize.
It took some time to convince the studio that we needed desperately to shoot the linking material, particularly after I showed them a version of the film that had some huge gaping holes in it. And I think they allowed us to come back several months later to shoot for an extra 2 weeks.
I think the first block of shooting that I did was called the additional photography phase, and they'd already shot the majority of the film, but had not got to some of these kind of crucial big scope sequences.
But the greatest challenge with this film visually was just getting it all done. It was a hugely ambitious project, and we sort of knew going in that we just could never do it for the time and money that we had.
There's a sequence going into the underworld, and I can't remember who's on the cart. I think it's Schreiber. Is it Schreiber and Murdoch? I think it is. Or it's Murdoch being taken down by the strangers into the underworld. And we built basically a little roller coaster with puppets on it. You know, they were like 1/12 scale little puppets. And at one point we wanted to get just behind that roller coaster as it went down into the underworld. So I had, we built a rig which was like a train track but larger. And we put a film camera movement. I think it was a camera movement from an IMO, which is a bombing camera, just the most basic movement you could possibly get, and it took a tiny roll of film, and we put this on this track behind our little puppeteered strangers, and this thing went down the hill into the underworld, and it's all in camera. It's a 10mm lens or a 14mm lens, and it's on the big screen. But literally, they're polystyrene columns of the underworld behind it, and it was a really low-tech solution, and all in camera. Nowadays, you do it all in CG, and it'd be easy. But this was kind of like, okay, let's build something really cool.
Then there was actually quite a long period of post-production. It did drag on for a while.
I remember one of the first things that I saw cut together was portions of when the strangers first come into the hotel where Murdoch's been found. And it was really exciting.
Well, the test screening process can either undermine you or bolster you, because it depends on how the film does, of course. If a film tests well, then it's a wonderful feeling. You're doing the right thing, basically.
We tested the film, the unfinished film, before an audience, and sure enough, one day that the other shoe fell, and Alex called me and said, "Guess what? The studio wants us to write some kind of prologue or a voiceover." So we did what we thought was like the least invasive voiceover possible.
It's probably the only time a film I've made has actually tested badly. I think all my other films have actually tested pretty well. You start to second guess yourself. You start to lose faith in what you're doing.
But you get to the point where you sort of worry that maybe they're right. That maybe it does require a little explanation. Maybe the audience is lost.
All throughout production, we had fought that battle because we wanted the audience to be confused at the beginning of the movie.
It was all about not understanding what was going on. And my point, of course, was that's what the film is. I want people not to understand what's going on. It all makes sense at the end, because I remember having a little group of, you do the little focus group afterwards, and I actually got up and asked a few questions and said, "Do you understand by the end what happened?" And they all said yes, But it was literally that thing of the studio not allowing an audience to kind of add up the sums as they go. They wanted it clear at the beginning.
I remember when Alex was in a recording studio with Kiefer Sutherland, and it was clearly a struggle. I mean, it's not that it was pulling teeth to a certain extent to write that opening narration. I know Alex tried, and David, I'm sure, tried, and I was faxing I think I still have my page of suggestions of words. So we were all party to it. That's certainly true. I don't think New Line, they weren't evil people. They weren't dogmatic to that extent. I think if we had put up a fight, or if Alex had put up a fight, they might have dropped it.
To a certain extent, I think that American studios underestimate American audiences in terms of what they can take in. And then to a certain extent, I think, American audiences, can be a little lazy sometimes.
The nice thing about the movie is that it does ask questions. Perhaps its subject matter is a bit too deep, too complex for us to get to grips with, but it asks the questions, and we as an audience view it and see these questions being posed, and therefore we go away and we further discussion.
And so I determined that really the only hope was that I stuck some sort of a voiceover at the beginning of the movie that at least allowed people an into the film, that said, okay, it's a science fiction movie and this is kind of what you're going to see.
I saw the original storyboards, I read the original screenplay, and I know it would have played without that. And I know that the type of people that were interested in this type of film, they don't need the voiceover. There's no question. They're on the journey and they're interested in the journey. They don't need to be told, or given it all in the first 5 minutes.
I think it's more in retrospect with the sort of fan base complaints about it. It's clearer now. The Monday morning quarterbacking, it's easier to see now that the narration was a mistake.
But it was definitely there for the dummies, there's no question.
But I think they probably felt that they didn't want to alienate certain people, but I just think, fuck them.
In a way, the greater damage that was done to the release of the film initially is the way it was marketed. It was really sold as some kind of a horror movie because they didn't know how to sell it. They didn't know how to promote the film.
It happens all the time. The idea of making a very, very particular film and then other people coming and trying to make the film appeal to an audience that the film wasn't made for, and in the process alienating the audience that the film was made for.
They screened the film before 3 members of the MPAA, and I had to go before them in this movie theater and then literally give like a 20-minute speech, and I had written it up with all my bullet points for why this film should get a PG rating or PG-13 rating. And they just kept on coming back to it. I remember one of the women said, I believe there were 2 women and 1 man, said, but it's just too weird. And then they couldn't put their finger on anything that was particularly, well, that's where Alex's weirdness bit him in the ass. They couldn't put their finger on, there wasn't really anything that broached or breached, any of the specific rules that made it an R. They just thought it was weird, so it should be R-rated.
The original release date was actually pushed back several months. There was a little film called The Titanic that came out, which seemed to dominate all the cinemas for many, many months. And so we decided that it would be best to wait a while and let that sort of fade away. Unfortunately, it never did.
Once it was R-rated, then Alex said, well, screw it. I'm going to put a little more nudity or, a little more violence or a little more swearing or something like that into it.
It was really like an art project, funded by New Line. It was cool.
Well, I think most people saw it because of the DVD. I don't think they saw it theatrically. Because I got sick of it, and I still hear it to this day. I got sick of people coming up to me and saying, was this film ever released theatrically? Why didn't I know about it? And these are people who absolutely love the film, So obviously whatever marketing campaign was designed didn't get through to the core audience, people who were open to a film like Dark City. So only a very small percentage of them saw it theatrically, and they've all caught up with it through the DVD,
Of all the movies I've been involved in, Dark City's definitely been the most satisfying in terms of the final product. And I remember in film school, one of my teachers saying, making a movie is so hard and there's so many opportunities for that movie to get derailed that if after the end of your career you're satisfied with even a single film, count yourself lucky. And fortunately I have a few more than that. But Dark City is sort of the closest percentage of being perfect.
I don't think anyone expected a huge release or a huge result. I was shocked that it got the critical reaction that it did, especially from, say, Roger Ebert. I thought that was amazing, and that's good enough,
I wish more people would relate to it. That's all. That's all I can say. Because becomes a little bit, it's a little bit too stylized. It becomes it's too cerebral. So it turns a lot of people off. But But it was Alex's experiment, you know. He just wanted to. This was his movie that he's written when he was in film school, you know.
For me, it feels like I never really finished the film. It feels like it was kind of incomplete somehow. And so being able to go back and finally finish it, it feels like there's closure now, which is good.
I'm a film fanatic who's so thrilled that I can own movies in my house and that I can watch them, forget a big, giant, plasma screen, that I can just watch them on my little portable DVD player that I can carry on an airplane and watch Lawrence of Arabia. I don't care if I'm not seeing it on a big screen. To me, it's the content, really, that's the be-all and the end-all.
I've had the experience more than 100 times now of people coming up to me on the street or whatnot saying, Dark City, oh my God, that's my favorite movie.
Every now and again, I'll be out somewhere and somebody will look at me and go, Dark City, one of my favorite movies.
There's two films that I did at that time. One was called The Honest Courtesan, but the title was changed to Dangerous Beauty. I still hate that title. And Dark City, which I did straight afterwards. So I can normally tell from the way people walk, if they come towards me, generally in America, I can tell from the way they come towards me whether it's going to be Dangerous Beauty or Dangerous Beauty. Like that, they come up. Sorry. And Dark City's a bit like that, Hey, yeah. I'm very proud of it because I think it's a really, really interesting film, and difficult to get made then, and even more difficult to get made now, I'm sure.
It's become, in its genre, an influential film. And so now people are watching it saying, well, how did... They want to eke out more stories and more, how did that thing happen? And at the time, Alex and Lem and myself, we weren't... I don't know that we were... Obviously, we were conscious of what we were doing, but we weren't conscious perhaps in the way that people think we were. We were just sort of finding our way through this strange, wonderful little movie saying, I remember the phrase Chinese box, and wanting to make a movie that forced people to think.
And of course, that's the nice thing about film. It's always going to be there. That's the wonderful thing. Things can be rediscovered. That's always good news.
Well, I mean, look, I'd love to be restoring the film for theatrical release, because I think still theatrical release is first and foremost the most powerful way to experience film, But I think DVD is a very, very good sort of second choice, I mean, I think with screens becoming larger and sound systems in people's homes becoming better and better all the time, and just the general resolution of DVDs improving all the time, I mean, it definitely is getting to a point where it's certainly approximating the theatrical experience, And I think eventually it will probably supersede it, down the line, for sure. But for me, the great thing about DVD is sort of, it's sort of a tangent to the actual experience, to the actual technical aspects of viewing a film, and that is that it does give people a chance to revisit things and hopefully improve upon what was done originally. I mean, I think I'm a better filmmaker 10 years down the line than I was when I first started conceiving and making Dark City, and I would hope that I could improve upon my work from that period. And in this particular case, I think there was certainly an impact made, a very negative impact made upon the film through the testing process, in that it sort of eroded my confidence in the film somewhat. And I was sort of convinced to make decisions that I think made the film suffer, such as the voiceover at the beginning of the film, which is a very specific example, but many other choices also. Rather than standing firm and continuing to have faith in my own vision, I think I took some steps that I should have perhaps not taken. And it's great to be able to go back and almost restore the film back to my original conception of what it should have been, rather than the film that was somewhat affected by the more commercial aspects of filmmaking.
Yeah. The great thing about the Noctilux is the Noctilux itself is so heavy. Sorry. I started taking photographs on set a little while before this, just because there was a lot of sitting around on set, and I found that after a while, people posing for you, if you keep on taking photographs, they just start to ignore you, and that's when you get good pictures. At first, you get all that, and people who think that they're helping you by turning to the camera and smiling, you know, even if you're filming a fight, you know, it doesn't really help. And I even went through this bizarre, wanky exercise of just not having any film in the camera for a couple of days, and just because I just bought this Leica and I was just practicing it anyway. So by the time you put film in the camera, everyone's got all their best poses out the way, and they're just starting to be mildly annoyed by you. But in the end, you can get some nice photographs just of what's happening around on set, and shooting with natural light. You know, the Leica's a nice one to do it with because they're very fast lenses. And also, you know, you can use when you're on set, and you know, in the underworld and the cityscapes and stuff. They were fantastic shots of light, you know. And I was using the Leica, and I had a Mamiya 7, which is a medium format, which I'd just got, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing with, so I wasted a lot of film on that. And I just discovered a new process, which is Polaroid 35 positive, which is like slides. And so you put the 35 film in the camera, take it out, process it yourself, put it through a machine and cut it into slides, which and it's very, very, all the black and white ones, very, very contrasty, but they're very easy to damage. I think I got on everyone's tits. Just taking I'd be, you know, like strapped to this machine with a thing and just go, hold on, just 1 second, you know. And as you said, Alex has memories of telling me to stop it, but I don't think he actually did. I think he just tutted under his breath. I got away with it for a while anyway.